It's been a rich week of learning and encouragement and inspiration that hopefully will give you that B12 shot as you head home and go do good work with people who need you. Today is our opportunity to speak a little bit more in-depthly about score study. And then I'd like to, if we have time, open up our time together to circle back to mapping, rehearsal strategy, or conducting, and just do some response time with you, because I do understand the experience of teaching and serving others, but not always having the opportunity to do a little self-reflection and focus, particularly as gesticulators, right? The actual physicality of what we do. So what I share to you today is an amalgam of the wonderful teachers that God has blessed me with in my own life and how they've influenced me. And if you have your own practices that you think would be beneficial, please feel free to share. Raise your hand, and we'll dive in. This is something that I am very passionate about and love, score study. Julius Herford is a very important name in the history of choral singing in the United States. Some of you may have heard of it, maybe not, but this is a quote that I love. Some of our greatest and deepest enjoyment as conductors can come not in performance, but in the quiet and intense process of learning, during which the simple but profound truths of the score reveal themselves. Anyone who has studied Bach understands this implicitly when we look and see the theology woven into the structure of the score. If we come across an acrostic figure in the score, that's if Bach takes an A, then writes a B, then writes a G, then writes an A. He's effectively drawn a cross in the score. So these are just amazing discoveries, and even for an extrovert like myself, some of my most important musical moments were just me in a score, not in the context of community or grand performance halls. The score, this is my teacher Sandra Stone now, the score is the written embodiment of the work of art. Study it well. It is your direct communication with the composer. The understood score, we talked about this yesterday, becomes the lesson plan. Continued time will yield new insights and teaching strategies. So when we look at a score, for me, I am just predispositioned to work from large to small and back to large again. And I really like to do this in rehearsal. So how many of us are familiar with the terminology micro-rehearser? Has anyone heard that? Okay. All right, so I'll just model micro-rehearsing for you. Would you all open up, oh love, and could you just sing that soprano, alto line? Here we go. Does anyone have perfect pitch, or am I going to have to walk over to the piano? Good job. Thank you. Here we go. One. So I'm going to micro-rehearse right now. And 1 and 2 and 3. Oh, sorry. Let's try that again and unify that ball. 1 and 2 and 3. This time the diphthong was a little too fast. So would you really try to sustain the, okay, you get the idea, right? So micro-rehearsing can be surgical. It is not fun to sit in a micro-rehearsal. When we approach our score study, it's so important that we give a global look to ourselves first, then dive into the detail, right? And so I think often forest trees forest. And for me, I shared this with you yesterday, harmony is really important. So I look, and I'll certainly make some sweeping judgments about the form at the surface without having done an exhaustive harmonic analysis. And I'll go, okay, I see a section here. All right, there's a new accompanimental figure here. This is cadential, etc. But then I'll dive in harmonically. So for me, I work large to small. And these are just some things to just prompt further inquiry. And trust me when I say I completely understand not having the privilege of time to do this. All right? I I understand that this isn't ideal and is not practical when, as I spoke with someone yesterday, what's your suggestion for me? I get to do an anthem a week, so I have one rehearsal in my ensemble. That's the real world, all right? And so we all have to reconcile our reality with the ideal, but I do think, particularly those of us who might be diving into maybe something that's more expansive or something that's more demanding, thinking about our high feast days in the church calendar, like Christmas, Easter, that these things are going to be really, really important when you're looking at the structure of an extended work and making sense of that, which is not something that we always do weekly. Some of us do, some of us work in context where that is possible, but most of us don't, right? Because we're largely dealing with amateurs. It's uncommon. Now, there are real big fancy places where there's a host of paid singers and they'll do the Herbert Howells Requiem, right? And that's not normal, okay? But it's exquisite, it's just not normal. So, character, genre, background, context, text source, difficulty. Is there a tradition or ritual associated with it? Is this piece arranged by a culture bearer? Is it written or assembled by somebody who understands the culture from which it's drawn? Are there instrumental needs? What's the translation? What's the meaning? These are all things for us to investigate. Modes of analysis. Okay, so harmonic analysis, we all learn to love that in freshman theory. That's what we call one of the weeding out courses in schools of music. It's horrible because I love music theory, but it really does make people go, wow, this is not what I expected life as a music major to be. I think I'll be a business major, right? Formal and bar line analysis. We are going to speak about this today, and for me, whoa, hey, Lord. Okay. When I taught in public schools, I would pray in rehearsal, but I would pray to the choir gods. It was just a big joke, but now we can actually talk about God. So that's a great, cool thing about teaching at Baylor. All right, so formal and bar line analysis. For me, this has been one of the most influential, important sort of developments in my leadership as a conductor that I've begun to practice, in the last probably 15 years, but it's not always something that we first come to and appreciate. Text, temporal, so time and tempi relationships. At the end of the day, we are arbiters of time only. When we conduct in our service or in performance, we cannot, although some of you may have had to, start singing or say to the choir, no, tenor says too loud, right? We really are just controlling time. And so this is really important that we have mastery over time and also temporal relationships. If you do not rehearse with a metronome on the regular, I want to encourage you to start that practice. Many of you who have former lives as instrumentalists were rehearsing with a metronome from the time you started. That's not always true of vocalists, because the voice is often a cantabile melodic instrument, and so it's not often functioning in an ostinatic sort of way. Is that a word, ostinatic? Today it is, yes. So it's rarely functioning in this sort of rhythmically driven way, and so working with a metronome is not a first stop for people, but as conductors we absolutely need to do it so that we're pretty accurate in pulling out 96 versus 84. How many of us have started something a little too fast at the beginning where it's quite simple, and then you get to the heat of the moment and it's a fully fleshed out fugue and you realize, ruh-roh, that's my fault. I've done that. Interpretive analysis. If you're somebody who is not familiar with the work of Jerry McCoy has a beautiful book called, what is it? The Choral Poet. And he spends a lot of time talking about interpretive analysis. I highly recommend it. And he really delves into the role of text in interpretation And for us, that's something that's specific to our work. When we think about a distinction between conductive, orchestral, or wind, or chamber repertoire without text, when we move into the realm of interpretive analysis, what is the difference between the word anger and wrath? What do you think? Like, if you were to differentiate, what is anger? Can anyone define anger for me? I'll say it with a smile. Can anyone define anger? Displeasure. Okay? Is it fast or long-lived? That's debatable. Yeah? What about wrath? How might wrath be different from anger? Is it different? And worse. I think anyone, you think it's, yeah, I agree, deeper. What were you going to say?
It feels like it implies an action too.
Okay. To me, there's a long-lived nature to wrath. And there's a finality to wrath. Anger could be long-lived, but also could be impulsive. Right? I'm angry. I'm filled with wrath. Right? So, we want to think about all of these little nuancey things when we're interpreting the text. Jerry delves into this. It's a wonderful, if any of you want to nerd out a little bit on analysis, get the book. It's great. And there's a lot of other good tools. Okay, then a conductorly analysis. So, many of you who are seasoned conductors won't need to do this, but we will need to look to the scenes. So for me, when I'm determining how I'm going to conduct something, I'll look to the places where I'm going to make my money. And that's often where there's a tempo shift, where there's some kind of complicated elision. Maybe it's a dovetailing of ideas. And then determine things like, what pattern am I going to use here? Am I going to subdivide here? The next level of that is Laban movement theory. Has anybody heard the name Rudolf von Laban? Do we know that? Okay. Yeah, so if you're interested in creating an extended language of your conducting, I'd encourage you to just do some reading about movement theory, which is Laban, L-A-B-A-N. And Laban shares with us several continuums of movement theory, so fast or sustained, direct or indirect, heavy or light. And then all of those sort of converge to create new movement languages. Many actors use Laban to help sort of inform the movement of the body. I talked about this yesterday in a session, or maybe earlier this week. All of the days become one day in my mind, so you have to forgive me. This idea of having a direct pattern, where I'm going directly to the next beat, or having an indirect pattern, and having that being based in the repertoire. And so when we do a gestural analysis, we're thinking about all of these things and finding some kind of nomenclature to put in the score and practicing it so that we are prepared. So harmonic analysis. I'll fly through this. Harmonic rhythm. If this is old hat to you, great. If it's not, I'm happy to share this with you. This is the rate at which the harmony changes. At the surface level, you might, let's just deal with the simple structure. 4/4. At the surface level, you may see, oh, it's 4/4, so the tempo is going to be based on that quarter note. But in actuality, the harmonic language might live actually at the half note, or in an Oyagielo piece, at the whole note, right? If you know Oyagielo's music, it's like a phrase will span 4 pages, like one 8-bar phrase will span 4 pages. So, basing our tempo decisions on the harmonic rhythm as opposed to what is the surface. And that's what our listener will hear and experience. Think about a 3/4 tempo, that the rate of change for chords is at the bar line. It's not at the quarter note. So then if we're doing something, da, 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 man, that drags. Da, 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 more like a dance or a minuet. Are there modulations or key relationships? What is the composerly treatment of dissonance? Are there suspensions, anticipations? What's the voicing? All of these things are things that we have paid attention to. All right, formal analysis. What's the structure? Binary, ternary, through composed? What are the techniques used? Fugues, trios? Where are the major arrivals? What's the bar line structure? What are the melodic motives? And we'll look at some examples. And if anybody has questions as I'm flying through this, let me know. In terms of textual analysis, and I hope this is just an affirmation of all of the things that maybe we don't necessarily need to do with every score, but we're aware of. And if it's not cool, we're learning some new things. Language, what's the language? What's the form of the original language, particularly when we're doing something in Latin or in what's another language? Is there another language that you might work with regularly? German, sure. What else? French. Okay, good. Yeah, the syntax and the structure of the language, it's so important not only to know the poetic translation so that you can speak in a way that makes sense, but that you also know where specific words that are important exist in the score. Like yesterday with Stabat Mater, filus, that's sun. Lacrimosa, that's weep. And if we translate it literally, it might not make sense, but it's important to know both of those things. What's the historical context? IPA, there are great resources online. For me, if I have an unfamiliar word, I just go to Google Translate, and oftentimes it will populate with the IPA, and it will even have a little person that speaks when I click on it. It's wonderful. So much better than when I was a younger person and had to, pull out dictionaries and look things up. So we have so many tools. What's the idiosyncratic nature of the language? So, as I said, most of us are working with amateurs who have not had the privilege of taking German diction or fill-in-the-blank diction, right? Or haven't learned the language of IPA. When we think, and I'm just going to be very grotesque, and when I say that, I just mean macro. What are some of our stereotypes with some of these languages? So when you think about German, where's the magic in German? Okay, you say dark. I just heard a noise. Thank you. So many years ago, there was something, I don't even know if BuzzFeeds exist anymore, if they probably do. But there was this juxtaposition of like hearing something in French and then hearing in German, the same thing. And they were essentially exploiting the differences. And it's not a value judgment. It's not to say one is more beautiful than the other, but they have idiosyncratic beauty. And if we embrace the idiosyncratic beauty of German and help people to lean into the ich, ah, all of the umlaut, right? It really is helpful to them to think about this. When we think about French, what's something that we associate with French?
The nasal.
Okay, nasality, good. Yes. Anything else? The ever-dreaded schwa. I think of the elongation of the vowel and the beauty that comes with that and the liquidity of speech. And I'm being very Western-centric right now. What about, what's the magic of Italian? Say that again. Mamma, pasta, balloni, pastrami, lasagna. It's bright, and to me, it's the rhythm of the language. Yeah. How does that differentiate from Spanish? Do I have any Spanish speakers who want to address that? Sarah, how do you conceive of the impact of Italian versus the impact of Spanish? I have something in my mind, but I want to hear from you first. You are far more informed than I am. Go.
It's difficult for me
hear Spanish, I automatically think about family.
Yeah.
And when I hear Italian, I think it's more like uppity. Like,
Do you hear what she did? She goes Italian. Did you hear that?
yeah. Oh yeah, there's definitely a different stress.
Yeah, so, like, to me, there's a softness to Spanish. And Italian is more plosive. It's more accented. It's more angular. And there's a gentle, to my ear, there's a more gentle nature to the sort of rhythm of the language. That's not so, right? And I don't know, I'm Italian, so I can say all the things I want about Italian people and language. But when I took my mom to Italy, she had really not been much out of Michigan, and so we went to Italy and backpacked for a while. And we landed in Switzerland, and we got off at the train station, and everybody is like wearing black, very chic, sitting at tables, sipping, talking to each other very quietly, right? And then we got on a train and went to Italy, and we walked out of the train station, and there are two people in the street doing this face to face. And my mom went, I feel more at home here. Because her father was named Rinaldo Giulio Garibaldi. That was my grandpa. And so this was very much the place, like the culture in which she grew up. So I can say all I want about Italians because I'm one of them. But we want to think about the idiosyncratic nature of language. And if we can do those sort of broad sweeps, it really does help our choir. Something as simple, I learned from Joshua Haberman, who conducts the Santa Fe Desert Chorale, who's one of the most masterful persons I've seen teach diction. And he said this, and it changed my life. He said, can you sing that with a German accent? Can you sing that with an Italian accent? Just asking people to do that changes things. Because then they go to those maybe not always accurate, but large sort of understandings and adapt. Remember, we're mimickers. We are mirror. God made us to mirror. That's why when a baby is so small and we say mama, 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 and they say da, 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 back at us. Right, I'm just kidding. But most kids do say da, da first. Even though mama, mama, mama might be up more at night than da, 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 da. I'm certainly not speaking from experience. But they smile, right? Babies look and they smile, and it's a mimicking. It's not necessarily heartfelt. They're really quite thankless creatures, but we still come back for more. In fact, there's a baby in the room right now, and I find myself being drawn to it. It's a mysterious thing. Okay. All right. So all of these things. Temporal analysis, where's the harmonic rhythm? What are the primary rhythmic motives? We looked at the pergolesi to see the different rhythmic motives that were there. We had the chain of suspensions, that rhythmic motive as well. What's the mensuration? So this is talking about, is it 2-2 or is it 4-4? Is it 3-4 or 1? How is it constructed? Is there hemiola? What are the signature shifts? Interpretive analysis, these are all more, I don't want to call them artistic means because I think form is artistic, but we generally tend to think of these in a different category. And I just want to encourage you that as you're teaching and introducing something, begin with artistry. Fold artistry into every teaching moment if possible. Don't think of it as an additive measure where, okay, we're going to learn pitches and rhythms first, and then we're going to learn diction. Oh, and then finally we add artistry at the end. I think beginning with artistry and having artistry at the heart of it, that's a plug for the next session, Heart of the Artist. If we start with artistry, it makes for a more compelling and meaningful process. Because to me, artistic decisions are always rooted in meaning. They're always rooted in purpose. How loud or soft we sing something is not arbitrary. It's based on meaning. There's a purpose in it. So I think trying to weave that into our teaching all throughout is a really compelling thing. So articulation, tone color, vibrato, character, conductivity analysis, harmonic rhythm we talked about is, okay, so when we think about Vivaldi's Gloria, would you count that as horizontal or vertical in nature? Horizontal or vertical in nature? Vertical, no question, right? And I don't mean to say simplistically that all music falls into one of these two categories, but I have found in my experience that one is dominant, okay? Or at least sections have a dominant focus. So how about Oh Love? No question, right? So when we think about our conducting that we prepare for both of these ideas, the vertical score, we're really, in our gesture, can be more vertical, more north-south. It's more rhythmically oriented. For me, if a piece is rhythmically driven, I'm going to really rely on the north-south dimension of my gesture to bring clarity to the piece. If a piece is horizontally driven, then I am going to do everything within my power to harness the horizon. How can I use the horizon to express this? And so I'm going to be thinking this way. Subdivisions. So when do we subdivide? What is your rule for subdivision conducting? When you think about, should I subdivide, to subdivide or not to subdivide? That is the question. How do we decide? Okay, tempo, yeah. Anything else? Sarah?
Difficult rhythm.
Okay, difficult rhythm, that needs clarity. Good. Anything else?
What's the tempo?
Tempo?
The tempo, yes. I think that directs it.
Yeah? Okay, emphasis, great.
Keep the passage together.
Holding on for dear life. Yeah, it's really, it has to do with temporal issues and the alignment of subdivision. Now what I will say is, oftentimes we subdivide too much and get in the way. If you get your passage and in your mind you think, I believe this needs to be subdivided, I charge you to try it first without the subdivision. Don't say a word to anybody. Next time, just as a test and measurement, subdivide and evaluate where there was greater accuracy. And then make your decision. It's always good to ask people, which did you prefer? And sometimes I get it right, sometimes I get it wrong, and I almost always defer to what helps the ensemble feel better. But oftentimes subdivisions can diffuse clarity. It's really important in the management of retards, and then also in the subdivision that is required for a new tempo. So if I'm going from maybe if I'm doing something and I need bum bum ping pong ping da tika da da da, where there's a tempo relationship. Let's say that the eighth note from the previous idea now becomes the quarter note of the next 3/4 section. So that's a time when subdivision can be really, really helpful. But in general, we do it too much. Where the seams, you know what I mean when I say seams, like on this thing, there's a seam right there. This is one section of the piece, here's another. Do we use baton? All right, learning the score. So how do we learn the score? How do we hear inside the sound? Start by playing and singing all of the, bless you, whoever that was, sing all the parts independently. And then combine singing and playing. This is really torturous. If you want to be humbled, which is good for all of us, try this. And that is to play through the score, sing one part, try to play another. Now for pianists, spelling is nothing, right? But for those of us who are not pianists, this is tough. If that's easy for you, try and play 2 parts and sing another. This will get your ear inside of the score. Just a word of encouragement to everybody. When we can't immediately realize the score, like I wish I could look at a complex score and imagine it in my mind's ear without playing it or having heard it. I can't do that. I believe that when we have limitations, those limitations oftentimes lead us to a more intimate knowledge of the score because we have to spend time with it. right? And so if I can fly and buzz through the score unless I have a photographic memory, that's not as much time spent as if I have to really break down the construction of it. So when you feel frustrated by a limitation that you have, I want to encourage you to embrace it as a strength, and that it can lead you to more understanding. Okay, so mark the score, and then conduct and sing each line of the score. I know that this is not always realistic, but what I would say is try to isolate the moments in the score where you know it's going to be challenging for a particular part, and then just focus on that. It doesn't mean you have to do this exhaustively, but if you know for your tenors, this one transition, like I can think of many moments in Brahms where the voice, like three voices are doing one sort of rhythmic gesture, and then Brahms takes one voice, isolates it, and creates a tempo shift in that one voice, and so that voice becomes pivotal in moving the entire picture to a new paradigm. So if you find that in your score, make sure that you can conduct it. And then lastly, the last step is conducting the score. All right. Many of you probably have your own color system. This is born of a series of people. Margaret Hillis is sort of considered a pioneer. Margaret Hillis is a famed conductor of the Chicago Symphony Chorus, and she had a very detailed methodology for marking her score. How many of you work from an iPad in Fourscore? Cool. Yeah, some of us do. My graduate students convinced me to get an iPad maybe 3 years ago, and I'll never go back. It's life-changing. Talk about investing in yourself. It really is a worthwhile, only if you get Fourscore. Right, so you have to get that app, and the app is expensive, but it's very worth it. And you'll see some pictures that come out of that. I'll show you some scores. But for me, these are the colors that I associate with these dynamics, and everybody has their own system. It doesn't matter what system you do, I just want to encourage you to experiment and find your own voice as in terms of what makes sense to your brain. Is anyone in here a synesthetic that sees color with music? There are people who actually see color with music. It's a pretty amazing thing. But for me, forte is red, piano is blue, and then green for mezzo forte and brown is mezzo piano. I use a highlighter pretty sparingly. In fact, before I used iPad, I never highlighted things because it felt way too much of a commitment. I didn't like putting ink on the score. But with an iPad, I can do it. So I use a highlighter to highlight meter shifts, and also temporal topics like tanto, ritardando, stringendo, accelerando. For me, that highlighted thing signals it has to do with time. I also will highlight thematic material that is shared between voices. If there's doublings, I will color, I will shade in the staff of two voices that are the same. Let's say the soprano and the bass are in octaves. I'll give them the same light shade so that I can break down the score a little more readily. When you get into more complicated scores, let's say that you have some instruments that are doubling the voices. This can help you in rehearsal really isolate groupings. So let's say that you have one rehearsal to pull together a work with a chamber orchestra, and you have got to get to business quickly. That doing these sorts of coloring things can really make, for those of us who are visual learners and just visual people, 1/3 of the brain is devoted to the visual cortex. So I think in the case of Ken, like all of that third of his brain went to the creativity. Imagine, like, my goodness, I think he is not human. He's somewhere in between, like, what? He's so incredible. But I'll do that for doublings, thematic material in a fugue. I will color what is the main subject, and so I know at any point who is the primary material in the score. I can look down. And also in voicing, like for me, I have colors that I associate with parts. The soprano is always yellow. The alto is like an amber burnish orange. Tenor is green and bass is blue. So for me in my score, those are colors that I associate with those voice parts. If I have instrumental doublings, I'll adhere. So this is a bass doubling. so that I can get to it. Now, this has taken a long time for me to develop, and so I would just say start experimenting. And there have been many iterations in my own practice where I start with something that I saw someone else do, and I try it, and I'm like, ooh, that's not for me. And then I'll try something else that somebody else does and go, wow, that's really cool, I'll keep that. That's the cool thing. You get to walk away today and keep the things that are helpful to you and let go of the things that aren't, right? You take what you want and need. So bar line analysis. This is a way to force yourself to commit to an interpreted hierarchy in the score. This is a definitive way to say, I'm going to identify the most important sections, the largest sections, with this distinction in my score. Okay, let's say I'm doing a multi-movement work, 5 movements. Hagenberg Illuminari, there's a really beautiful, accessible work with chamber orchestra. Every single movement will get that distinction. It's the only place I'll put it in. This is at the beginning of a movement. Within each movement, let's say that one movement itself has 6 sections that are clearly defined. They'll get this distinction in my score. Then within each of those, I'll draw these, and this is all done with a thick pencil marking, because you will erase these, they will change. That this thick bar line extends above and below, and then the very smallest that is reserved for groupings of 2 and up, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. When I get to a group of 6, I never do, like, I will do bar line for a group of 6, but if I get to 7, there's usually a governing structure within the 7 that's a 3-4 or a 4-3, and so I'm going to delineate that distinction. And these numbers of like how big the phrase is will inform rehearsal. So when you're in rehearsal and you want to identify the major sections, look down at the score if you don't have a photographic memory, and then you can look and isolate to the most important material or the beginning of a section so fast. It improves efficiency. If we don't have these bar lines in our score, then we're really looking at something that appears to be quite too composed. Not to say that it's not too composed, but this helps us in rehearsal. All right. These are just, I need to get a little sip of water, so I'll let you meditate on that. I don't do this. I do a J in my score, a backward J. But these are little symbols that I put in the score to indicate which pattern I would use over a passage. So if it's a 2 pattern, I'll draw a backward J right above it. If it's a 4 pattern, I'll draw a square. If it's a 3 pattern, I'll draw a triangle. Does that make sense? Cool. I did a cantata with Bach had said it. The opening movement was in 12/8, and the 8th note got the pulse. So I had to conduct it in 12. Talk about work, my gosh. None of these symbols fit that paradigm. Okay. So here's a little example. This is a piece of music I did with the a cappella choir this year. It's called In the Middle by Dale Trumbore. It's a great little piece about in the middle of our life, time, and the role that time plays. It's got a really frenetic energy to it. Time is unstable as we stumble from task to task. So it starts in the middle of a life that's as complicated as everyone else's. So she starts in 4/4, and it says quickly, almost frantic, I did that in 4 because the next bar is a 5. It's a 5/4. For me, when I get into 5s and 6s, I'll still draw a box, but I'll put the number in between. That's just my own language. So I know that 1, 2, 3, in the middle of a life. Now I'm going to 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then the next bar is in 4/4. However, that she introduces this triple figure that changes it to live at the half note. You see that? I keep it in 4 to keep it consistent, but as soon as the altos sing, struggling for balance, and the chords are changing at the half note, I change to a 2 pattern, which I didn't notate there. If I were a good teacher, it would have a J there. So I conducted this 1, 2, 3, 4, then a 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, back and forth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Struggling for balance, chord, juggling time. If I did a 4 pattern, struggling for balance, I'm going to get a clave rhythm from the choir. I'm going to get the da-da-ba-ba, ra-da-da-da, the great sin of the triple quarter note. Singing it as a dotted quarter, and a quarter. That's often what happens, and it's not accurate. So to give people the space, to really find an honest half note, then I switch to 2 there. Does that make sense? Even though at the surface it's 4-4, I move to a 2-2 there to allow the subdivision to rule what happens within the ensemble. You can see the bar line analysis here, right? There are my delineations. This is a major seam. There is a fermata there. And then we go to 2-4 and 4-4, so you can see those indicated there. Okay. What do I have next? Oh, gotcha. So this is just a picture of what it looks like. Any questions on anything? Does that all make sense? This passage with triple, oh, that's a 5, another triple, and a 5 tuplet. Guess what I did? I got out of the way. And let my brilliant accompanist freely, slowly, I don't need to control that. If I do, I mess it up. So I just wait to this chord and then gave the next downbeat because we have a new tempo. Now we're in 4-4, but with a quarter note equals 60. So she gets to the chord, and then we come together on this downbeat. She's not doing anything there, but 1, 2, and so on and so forth, and then the choir goes on. Okay, how many of you have sung Chichester songs? Yes! How many of you have conducted it? You should. Okay, good. Even just to study it is a wonderful experience. So this is messier, right? You can see this is not the score that I conducted with. This is a study score. But you can see the role of numbers here. For me, when I'm dealing with, so I've sort of given you the things that we most commonly see, 2-4, 3-4, 4-4, there's a J, there's a triangle, there's a 4-4, but that's not all music. And so for me, when I deal with 8th notes, I almost always go right to numbers. That's not what everybody does. There are a lot of people who handle it in a different way, and I'll show you some different strategies. And I welcome anybody to share when they're marking mixed meter or something that's at the 8th note level. But for me, I will often do some kind of combination of numbers. And all of these numbers might not make sense to everybody, but to me, when I sit and struggle with a score, I just begin to memorize it and associate things with it. So, like when I'm doing something like this, like that 5-4, there's a 6, then a 3, and then this is a little thing just to draw your attention to. You'll notice that the triangle is followed immediately by the 3. Do you see that? And so this, for me, anytime I see a triangle, I think 3-4. When I see the number 3, I think 3-8. I think 3-8. Let's look at a little more Bernstein. Now this is just to show you a delineation of groupings, and this is hugely helpful, I learned this from Richard Biella, who is my treasured teacher for my doctorate. When we're making these bar line analysis of the score, he has a system where if it's a group of 2, he will take the 2 bars. This is in 7-4. This is the right? Isn't that a beautiful rendition for you? I know you will be inspired. But there are 2 bars of 7/4. Anytime there's a 2-bar grouping, he'll take and draw a little rooftop over it, okay? I think that there is an angularity to simple numbers, right? Corners, there are corners, 2, 4, and then there's a circular nature to triple. And so you'll see, here's a group of 3 bars. So this is where the allegro molto comes in, and then tenor and bass, then the tenor bass comes in, right? That grouping of 3 gets a curved arch above it, and then grouping of 4 bars get corners. When I look at this score, so let's just deal from the allegro molto, I memorize shapes. So I'm going to memorize curve, square, roof, square. All of a sudden, the score gets a lot smaller. Imagine it without any of the lines, without any of the distinctions. Now the structure of the score is emergent, and it helps me to know where I am needed and where events occur. So there's an event that occurs here. It's the first time we hear this motive. There's an event here that occurs, right? All of the sopranos and the altos come in. Look, this is where the tenor, see, we've got the tenor comes back in. Does that all make sense? This I do with every single score that I conduct, no matter how simple the score, because it really helps me in rehearsal. It's very, very, very helpful. And it also that's the end of it, okay. Form leads to feeling. Form leads to feeling. Okay, any questions on any score marking things? Anyone willing to share their choices when they're dealing with mixed meter? How do you mark that in your score?
I put just a simple number at the beginning of each bar.
Great.
3, 4, 5, 3.
Cool. Great. Yeah. And for me, if I have a symmetrical meter like 5, 8, 7, 8, I'll do the number and I'll do a plus. So I'll do 2 plus 3. Or 2 plus 2 plus 3. And I'll do it just one time if our composer has set a pattern and the pattern is consistent. And the Bernstein, that 2, 2, 3 is consistent. It's never changing. So I only need to delineate it at the beginning and follow suit. That way, when there's a change, it's fluorescent on the page because it stands apart. It's like, I think maybe, I don't know if I told you this story this week, maybe I did. My Italian grandpa, you know, the one named Rinaldo Garibaldi, swore all the time. He married an English woman, said, I'm never marrying an Italian woman. I'm going to marry an English woman. And he married Claire Allen, my grandmother. When I was a child grandma, I remember my grandma swearing one time. Only once. We were playing Pictionary. And grandma chose to spend her one swear word when no one would guess that she was drawing the verb clap. And when she swore, the entire family, it's a huge family, we're used to grandpa, we tune grandpa out. But when grandma swore, we all just roared. What did you just do, grandma? Right, she made that count. So when we mark our scores, make it count. Be like Claire Ellen, not Rinaldo. Yeah. Anybody else have any score marking practice that they utilize? Yeah, anyone want to share?
Just general, like when I'm doing a conductor score, orchestra, I typically highlight cues with different colors based on
Great.
different instruments, like you do with the voices.
Yeah, that's so important. For me, in a complicated score, I'll often do that in red, just or like vibrant magenta, so that my eye is incredibly drawn to it. Because in those moments, when it's quick, we've got to be fast to know what's coming next. Here's another thing as conductors that we don't always think about, but it is a big transition, that we are never allowed to live in the moment. We always have to be ahead. It is our responsibility to be ahead. And that's a sad thing sometimes. I remember having that realization, like, I don't get to linger in this moment, even if the moment is happening. I am thinking about what is next and what do my people need next, right? Cool. Any other thoughts? Any other thoughts? Yeah.
I think when I mark my scores, I try to mark large instances and stuff because we don't sing about memory in most churches.
Right, right.
Everyone's looking at their music. My head is always had my music. Their heads are always going to be that their music. And I don't think it communicates to the congregation and the audience if they just look at the forehead. So if they're looking at my forehead, they're not going to know.
Such a good point. When we think about the how of memorization, it's a real task. And I would like to just commend to you the structural analysis and then taking that structural analysis and making a shorthand map. This is one way that I've memorized very complicated scores, is let's say that the first section of the piece is 2 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4. I'm going to draw on a line only the shapes. I'm going to draw roof, roof, curve, square. And then I'm only going to conduct from that. And that tells me what the structure is of that line. And I will make a cheat sheet and work independently with that to help myself remember the structure. And then we are availed to know, oh, there's an event in 2 bars, there's an event in 2 bars, maybe it's based on cues, whatever it is. Thank you. Anyone else? Anyone else? Yeah.
Getting away from like orchestral scores and everything, if it's like a single line I'm looking at, I will usually, if I've got the space to write a familiar like show tune, or especially if it's for like a choir that doesn't read music, it's like, hey, reference this song from this musical, and they'll go, oh, I know that song. Well, that's what your line is doing right there.
Oh, cool.
And they get it like usually like 2 or 3 times afterwards. It's like, there you go.
That's a transfer where they're taking something they know from a different context, they're applying it to a new context, and they're transferring that knowledge. Cool, very cool. Okay, any other things? Let's just start to take a look at the Elaine Hagenberg and do a very brief analysis. Did you know you were coming to Theory today? It's a good day. Friday Theory! So let's go ahead and take a look at this. And feel free to work with a buddy or a stranger. I know that's everyone's favorite thing to do at a conference, is to be forced into families. But we are all in the same family. We all love Jesus, and so that can be our common thread. We are going to spend eternity with each other, my friends. So we may as well become friends now, so that we can say hi in heaven, and not where do I know you from? Okay. So take a look at this, and with a buddy, can you define how many major sections you perceive in the score? So if I'm going to go back to my bar line analysis. Let me find the slide. If we were deciding how many get that, new sections larger than the changes above, how many we should choose in this little piece? Feel free to talk. Just talk through what you're seeing in the score. Anyone else? 5, cool. Anyone else? 6? All right, so we're kind of jiving in the same neighborhood. Yeah.
7.
7. I think it did, those micro differences are going to be interpretive, and this is absolutely tied to growth. So when we look at the piece of music, and if we're just gonna be really, we're gonna fly out here, so we have this simple, and all of these are really symmetrical groupings of 4. And so in a piece like this, like you'll see up here, I'm not drawing the little squares because I've then analyzed it and I know, oh, it's all 4s, so I'm not going to take the time to do that. I like to be efficient. I'm sure that saved me about 10 seconds worth of work. But I know that. So we've got an open introduction that sort of presents this main idea. The sopranos and the altos sing it as a duet. That's the first iteration. And then we have a scene change. And I would imagine that most of us have to find things pretty in parallel. I think the differentiations may come in how we interpret the apex. Is there, although I think it's quite clear, is there anybody who wants to say, I think this is the peak of the entire work? The tallest building in the city. When we look at the architecture of a city, we see lots of buildings, and almost always, there's always the tallest building in the city. So where's Elaine Hagenberg's tallest building in this city?
Page 7.
Did I hear page 7?
Yes.
I hear 7 and I hear 10. Well, let's fight about it. 7. Okay, team 7. Somebody from team 7. Speak your case. Oh,
You
nobody's.
have these long lines at the top of 7 with the tenors and basses. It's obviously got to go somewhere. And you get to the top of 7 and boom, you've got the sopranos giving that, and you've got a big retard, you've got a retard going into it, and then you've got that odd tempo there. And the sopranos start going higher and higher. And it just feels to me like after that point, it starts coming back down on page 8.
Okay.
So it feels to me like that's the climax. I don't know if it's the climax of the piece, but then when you look at the rest of it, I mean, you could argue page 10. I could see that because you've got those quarter note patterns on page 9 leading into 10, but I don't know. I kind of feel like those long lines on page 7 leads me to that place.
It's a different sort of expression. They're both climaxes.
They are.
No question. The tessitura tells us that. The dynamic is also a clue. So let's take a look further at 7. What's the dynamic at the apex of this? That's a forte. So even though, oh, thanks, Elaine, you're asking the sopranos to sing that G and that's a forte. Good luck with that. She must have very self-controlled sopranos in her choir. I don't know about y'all, but I'm a soprano and I know how I like to sing a G. Well, let's take a look at 10. What's the dynamic? Yeah, so that implies a hierarchy, I think. However, the long game of 7 is a different burn. It's slower, it's more incremental, and that will have, in my mind, a bit of resistance in it. So when I think about how does that musical idea translate to tangible gesture, that there's going to be more resistance in my gesture so that they aren't absolutely free to honk, I'm going to let them honk at 10. And there'll be more wind speed, more space, more freedom in the gesture. Does that make sense? Cool. Unfortunately, my friends, I think I'm out of time. I am not going anywhere and would be delighted to speak about conducting challenges with anyone who does not want to have a break. I will take a 5-minute break, but I'll come back and I'm glad to talk through any conductorly decisions as you look at the score. We would appreciate the scores back, and if you're so inclined, go buy the score. It's fabulous. You'll use it perennially. It's probably, I've heard, although I've only been at Baylor 1 year, but we did sing it this year, I've heard that this piece has shown up every single year for past memory in one of the choirs, whether it's GP or SA or SATB. So I promise you, money well spent. In fact, I would imagine she wishes she had self-published this so that, because it is just magic. All right, so let's take a 5-minute break, and anyone who wants to talk some conducting shop, I'm here for it. I'll be right back.